Welcome. This is a 3ds Max tutorial for a Nordic bow from the game Skyrim. And I'm doing a voiceover for my recording of this, so I'm going to be jumping in and out and explaining what I'm doing at certain points. So when you start any 3D model that you need a reference for, you're going to need to find those reference images. So right here I went to Google Chrome, just looked up a couple images of the Nordic bow from Skyrim. Lots of the pictures we see here are really stylized, and we don't really need that. We need a picture that's kind of something that we can just trace over. So the picture I chose here was just a flat sideways picture. And I'm putting these in this folder here because I already have some extra pictures that I actually need those details for. This is just in case I can't see those details in the picture I'm tracing over. You can see a couple of these shots I took from Skyrim VR. These are just a couple angles that I could see what the object actually looks like and use them as like a reference for my reference. These references will come in handy later on when I need to fix some details into the object itself. So when you first start modeling, you need to create a reference plane. So what I do here is I go into my Create tab and I grab a plane and I put it into the front view just so I could see it from the actual front. Everything's kind of oriented correctly. It doesn't really matter too much about the sizes, but what you got to do is change your length segments to 1 because you really don't need any more segments and it just causes more geometry to mess with, or it just gets in the way. So you should always have less geometry, especially if it's just a reference plane. So right here, I'm changing my length and width of my plane to 100. And that's just to make it symmetrical for my reference plane. In this next part, you go to the material editor at the top over there, and you have to drag over the bitmap, and that will allow you to bring your photo into 3ds Max. Next, you have to go to Scanline and go to Standard. And this will help you bring your actual image onto your plane. So you have to grab these tabs and you have to bring it over to Diffuse. And if you double click on any of these things, you can highlight over them and see the subcategories of them. But what you do is you go to the Standard Scanline and you click on Show Shaded Material in Viewport. Making sure you have your reference plane selected, right click onto the Scanline standard block and assign it to the material. That'll bring your picture over to the actual reference plane. In this next part, I'm centering my reference image to be at the very center of my entire project. So I'm switching those X, Y, and Z coordinates to 0. And just to help me out with further modeling this, I'm going to rotate it so the bow is actually straight up and down. Right here I'm going to the Hierarchy tab, and I'm adjusting my pivot to be at the center of my handle for the bow. This makes it a lot easier to center the handle of the bow at the 0, 0 point on the grid. So now we have most of the setup for our reference image pretty much done. Right here I'm just moving my reference image into a new layer, just so it's not going to interfere when I model. And just so we don't mess up the location of our reference image and make sure it stays at 0, 0, we're going to freeze the image. But when we freeze it, it turns gray. To stop that from happening, what you have to do is you have to go to your Object Properties and uncheck Show Frozen in Gray. And I usually turn on Backface Cull as well. This helps with viewing your object behind your reference image, especially if you have more than one reference image. It helps with not having any of your reference images block your view from your model. One thing I'm going to do with this model is I'm going to kind of just roughly lay out boxes that I want to be in certain positions. This will help with making like a basic outline for my model. Right here, I forgot that I was working in a three-dimensional space, and I think it was because I was using only one reference image. So make sure that you're setting your height as well as your length and width. Right here, I start setting my boxes to around 5. Right here, I start shaping the handle. I turned it into an edible poly, and I start using the vertexes to edit its shape. When using vertexes, you have to make sure you're highlighting both vertexes, or else you might end up only grabbing one just by clicking on them. This is why I'm dragging, because then that selects both the front vertex as well as the back vertex. Right here, I come to the end of finishing up the outline of the handle, and currently that model is still a box, and it doesn't exactly look like a handle for a bow. And under the Modify tab, if you scroll down, you can see Use NURM subdiv. This will use a temporary turbo smooth onto your object, and this will basically smooth out your object. Now the way that current model looks, it doesn't exactly look like a handle either. So what you're going to do is you're going to add some more swift loops to the top and the bottom, and this will make it look more cylinder-like. So right here I notice a little black part just before the handle guard. So I decided to add that into the handle itself by extruding the top and expanding it by extruding the outsides. Now when I click extrude, initially it is shooting in an off direction. That's not the exact way I want it to be. I wanted it to just go straight up. So what you can do is if you put extrude at 0, and then if you drag up on the y-axis, it'll make a straight extrusion rather than having it extrude on the face's angle. Right now I'm selecting the outside, and I'm going to extrude that outside. So there are a couple edges that were created by the inset on the very top of the model, and I'm just going to quickly select those. And if you hit Control Backspace, this will delete the edges but not the face of your object. And now the model has a flatter top now as well. So just like before, when I hit the subdiv, it made everything smooth. So I'm going to add a couple more swift loops to make these have a nice fine edge. So I finished box modeling the handle. So instead of talking you through how to box model the other two, I'm just going to fast forward through those. And then when we come back, I'll show you how to do the rest of it. Right here I noticed that since I'm making those other objects like the handle guard, they are a bit thicker than the handle itself. So yeah, that's one thing you have to keep in mind of if you're only using one reference. Is make sure you look over your other references to make sure you're not skipping over details that would probably take you a lot longer to fix in post. Right around here, I start moving the objects into their correct height and start stacking them on top of each other in the correct ratio between the handle and the guard handle. The way I do this is I start changing their pivots to be at their center of their objects and then move everything to 0. It's a really easy and efficient way to set all these objects on top of each other while still being symmetrical. Right here, I switch from making that arc piece into one large piece to 2 separate pieces, mostly because one side will have fur on it and the other will have that metal design. Since I made these 2 objects separate, I needed to have a way to connect them. So what I did was I went to their vertexes and turned on the snapping tool for pivot and vertex, and it was as simple as just dragging one of the vertexes into the other. Right around here, I start meddling with hair and fur modifier. I never used it myself, so I had to learn what exactly I was doing. And what I can tell you is that it sucks. Oh, I'm kidding, it doesn't suck, but it's a bit tiresome to work with because you have to comb the hairs into the correct position. And I don't know exactly how to use it, so I fiddled with it for quite a while before I actually got it into a position that made it look realistic. Right around here I noticed that the two arc pieces are a bit too wide, so I used this select and uniform tool to shrink them down a little bit. This is when I started building the lion head on the end of the bow. I ended up trying one method of making the lion head by using the connect tool to create more vertex points that I could manipulate to make the head, but that ended up making a lot more weird geometry that I couldn't really fix. I end up trashing the idea and start using a series of swift loops and extrusions to create the mouth of the lion. And right here I start adding some swift loops into the lion's head so it actually keeps that harder edge shape that I needed to have. Now right here is a good example of why you need multiple reference images to create a model. Right here it looks like my model has a chamfer right at the top lip of the lion's head, so I ended up creating it, and this was because the reference plane couldn't keep the quality of the image. And that's a definitely good reason to have a good quality image when you are creating a model. Right around here, there's a bit of an edge shape for those lips. They have like a bit of like a spike coming out of them. So what I ended up doing was grabbing that last vertex at the edge and just stretching it a bit further out. And that gave it the edge that it needed. Right around here I noticed that I messed up on the chamfer, and what I do is I just add a vertex in the center, which ends up fixing the entire mistake really easily. right around here, I finish up the line head, and I check on another reference image to see if I missed any details. And it looks like the front of the lion head squishes in a little bit. So I end up grabbing the vertexes and using the select and uniform tool. I end up squishing those in just very slightly and just going lower and lower with each vertex getting smaller. On the reference image, you can see that the lion head is connected to the bow arm. And so what I do is I grab a small piece by shift dragging it out and creating it as a new object, then extrude it and make it more of like a solid box that connects to the bow arm. Right here, I'm creating another object, and this is the connection between the lion head and the bow arm. I just finished the lion head, and I'm now starting on the actual bow arm. And it looks like this larger piece is a good starting point, and I feel like the entire bow arm can probably be made out of it just by using insets and extrudes. In the reference image, you can see these two little slats inside of the bow arm, and I tried making them part of the actual bow arm, but I ended up finding it easier to just grab out the key components for creating them from the bow arm and making them as a new object and then just placing them back in the correct spot. After finishing up the bow arm, I check another reference image to see if there's any details, and just like the lion head squishing into the front, the bow arm squishes to the back. So I use the Select and Uniform tool to slowly grab each vertex and slowly move them in until the last vertex. This is also when I started adding the detail into the top handle guard, the detail at the top of the bow, and added the nuts into the bow arm. Just like before, when I created an object, I adjusted their pivots and centered them to 0. That was a really easy way to make that directly in the center where that nut needed to be. And the way I made the nuts was I made a smaller cylinder extrude up and then out. And since it was already in a hexagon shape, it was the correct shape. And then all I had to do was rotate them into the correct orientation. This is also where I spotted a piece that I missed connected to the arc and the bow arm. So I quickly made that shape and then just added it in. At this point, I've finished the model, and I group up all the pieces that need to be grouped up. That includes the bow arm, the arcs leading to the bow arm, and after I grouped up all those objects, I mirrored them on the z-axis and put them on the other side where the other bow arm would go. And right here you can see me fixing the furry arc to match the bottom guard from the handle because it's a bit different shaped from the top guard. After that was done, all I had to do was comb the hairs in the right direction for the furry arc. At this point, the bow is done, and all we need to do is add the string. To create the string, you go to the Create tab and go to the splines. And if you create a line that goes straight down, you can create a loft using a circle and create a bit of width to the line. And that makes it look like a string. And after completing that, I usually create a stage for the rendered picture I will take. I also include a light, and I usually texture the entire object. If you follow along with this tutorial, you have now completed a Nordic bow from Skyrim.